The appropriate location for the homily is the ambo, because it's supposed to symbolize the empty tomb of Jesus Christ from which the resurrection is proclaimed. But the Missal does say that occasionally, for pastoral reasons, the homily may be given in another appropriate place. In my opinion, there's usually very little times that is relevant. But today I just wanted to highlight that in the very back of our church here, we have this beautiful stained glass window of the Transfiguration, which we read today on the second week of Lent. And I think the church in her wisdom gives us this reflection on the second week of Lent to motivate and inspire us at the beginning of this season. I don't know about you, but for me, after the first week of Lent, I kind of get a feel for what the Lenten practices are going to entail. And then it's like, oh, I'm only in the second week and I have a lot of time out in front of me. The church gives us this as a reflection to inspire and motivate us, as if to say, during your Lenten journey, whatever your Lenten sacrifices and Lenten practices are, keep your focus on the glory of Christ. What do we see in this figure of the Transfiguration? We see our Lord raised up between heaven and earth because he is that conduit between heaven and earth in the incarnation. We see on his left, we have Moses, and on his right, Elijah. Moses is, of course, holding the 10 Commandments, the tablets of the law. So he symbolizes the law. Elijah, on the other side, is the prophet, and he's holding the book of prophecy there. So Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. And then we see down here, and I love the way that the artist depicted it, because it does reflect, I think, the gospel well. The disciples are on the ground, almost covering their face and beholding the glory and almost overwhelmed and overpowered by the amazing glory that is coming from Christ. It's funny, all the other windows are lit up with the sun, and this one, I guess, is hiding behind the building, but oh well. That Peter, James, and John want to build booths or tabernacles. Now, the reason for this is because this figure of the Transfiguration was happening during the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles. It's a yearly feast that commemorates the fact that they escaped from slavery in Egypt and had to spend 40 long years in the desert, living in huts, living in temporary housing, which they called tabernacles. And even to this day, the Jewish people will build huts in the back of their homes during the Feast of Tabernacles and live in them as a reminder of that time in exile. Well, brothers and sisters, you and I have a tabernacle right here in the church. And that's what we call where we house the Eucharist. This is our tabernacle. So that word is supposed to invoke in us the idea that we are in exile, that we are traveling towards our homeland, our heavenly homeland. This tabernacle is here with the Lord's presence to help us to get there. He is our guide. He hasn't abandoned us. He is with us every step of the journey. But this is not yet our homeland. Even the word parish means a pilgrimage. We're all on a pilgrimage right now. Also, too, that should invoke the image of Mount Tabor is this predella. These are the steps that lead up to the tabernacle. Now, practically speaking, of course, this was so that people could see the altar when Mass is being celebrated. But it should also invoke in us those many times that God has given some revelation on a mountaintop. Think of Moses receiving the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. There was lightning flashes, the earth quaked, there was a sound of trumpet blasts and thunder, and the people were afraid to go near the mountain. Only Moses dared to ascend, and there he received the 10 Commandments. Or think about the sacrifices on the Temple Mount. It's on a mount. So the beautiful temple was built on the mount, that meeting place between God and man where the Holy of Holies was, where you would go to make your vows or give a sin offering, etc., a communion offering. All the different sacrifices were done on that mount, meeting God there. And then, of course, today, Mount Tabor, Jesus is transfigured before his disciples. This is what we are to imagine when we come here every time to Mass, before our tabernacle, at our little Mount Tabor, we see a little glimpse of the Lord's glory. Now, I was not there at the time of the Transfiguration, but we do have a little snapshot of details from the Gospel. But I'm sure that this little description does not do it justice. Just like when you hear astronauts come back from outer space and they say, here's the pictures that we took, but, it was so much more breathtaking than these pictures can convey. You had to be there, That's how an experience of something very glorious usually is. You had to be there. You had to experience it. In order to help me appreciate the glory of our Lord here in the tabernacle, I find it helpful sometimes to think of all of the glorious experiences that I've had, something that I would relate that word glory to, put them all together and bring them here. And imagine that happening here. God is the source of all that is good. So anywhere that we've seen or experienced something that is tremendously beautiful, that is overwhelmingly glorious, anytime we've seen that or experienced that, that's a little glimpse of our Lord. And so we can take those little glimpses, put them all together, and then that helps me anyway as a spiritual exercise to appreciate what we have here. This is our Mount Tabor. Let us experience that glory. I did go up Mount Tabor when I was in the Holy Land, and it happened to be at a really good time when it was just done raining, and the sun was just coming out of the clouds. You had the crepuscular rays coming down from the clouds. There were several rainbows. There were multiple rainbows throughout the land all around us, and it was just a very beautiful sight. It was something I was overwhelmed with. We live in a culture that really values efficiency and pragmatism, and sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to appreciate and revel in beauty. I think it's so important to every now and again, when we come across something that reminds us of God's glory, just to take a moment to revel in that, to enter into it like a spiritual experience and realize that this is a small glimpse of God's glory. Doing this week after week when we come here to Mass, this is what gives us the strength to continue on our journey. While we are in our exile, we are in our desert traveling towards the Holy Land, we have this tabernacle here that we can reflect on God's glory. So take a moment to think of all of the most beautiful things that you know of in life, all of the most glorious experiences you've ever had. Put them all together, and then think about that in the context of our little Mount Tabor here in front of the tabernacle. This is the kind of inspiration that our Lord wants to give us. Just like we heard in the opening prayers of this Mass, that with minds made pure, we may rejoice to behold your glory.